Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Pipefy webinar today. Today, we'll be talking about NDA process automation, how to deliver greater efficiency, process oversight, and reduce the risk of noncompliance. I am excited to get into our content, but before we do, I have a couple of housekeeping items. You are muted, so please use I'm going to make sure it's called the chat for conversation and the Q&A for questions. This is going to be a short introduction in terms of format and then into a panel style discussion. Feel free to put questions in the Q&A during that session, but we'll also have Q&A at the end. And we will be sending out the slides and recording as a follow-up. But thanks again for joining, and we're going to go ahead and jump into the content. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Kristin Davis. I'm a product evangelist here at Pipefy, which is a new title for me. I've been in various roles in software for the last 20 years or so, beginning in consulting and then moving into sales consulting and then moving into sales as well as sales enablement. So I've been sort of all over the sales organization and consulting organization. I'm new in marketing and I work now in our product marketing department here at Pipefy. And I came here to join a really dynamic and rapidly growing company that is solving a lot of business problems for a lot of people. So I'm excited to have you here today to talk about kind of a specific business problem that we think Pipefy can solve. So we're going to talk about kind of what are some drivers in legal operations that are kind of driving automation and driving the digital transformation across many departments, but specifically for today, we'll be talking about legal departments and specifically talking about the NDA process as a great way to get started with an organization's digital transformation within the legal team. Then we'll have our panel discussion. I'll introduce our panelists in just a little bit. We can have questions during our discussion, and we'll also have time for an open Q&A towards the end. And then I just have a little bit to share with you to give you a little background on who Pipefy is and kind of what we do. And we do appreciate you joining today. So let me go ahead and jump into our content. What are some trends and challenges that we're seeing within legal departments? And I'll specifically also talk about the automation of the NDA process. So thinking about kind of general process challenges in the NDA process and some challenges specifically, one of the big trends we're seeing in the digital transformation and the digital journey within organizations today is that employees are really frustrated about spending time on low value work and the repeatability, the manual activity, and sort of just the day-to-day grind, if you will, of these repetitive tasks is wearing on folks. And especially in the legal department, you have pretty highly educated and pretty smart people. And some of the work that has to be done is a little bit tedious and kind of low value. So managing NDA specifically in a manual fashion, it just requires the legal team to spend time on non-strategic work when they could be doing kind of more for the business in general. So that's one reason to think about kind of some challenges you're facing within the legal team. And we'll talk about kind of the automation potential of that process specifically. It's repetitive, right? So you might have multiple versions of your NDAs, but it's typically the same contract over and over again. And so you're negotiating the same items. And if there could be some automation for communication to get rid of some of that repeatability and repetitive nature of it, that's another kind of pain that is potentially solved. And then having been in sales for a really long time, I don't want to be disrespectful, but a lot of times that kind of push-pull and relationship and the delay of submitting a request for an NDA while you're in sales and trying to get that out to your prospect or your customer and waiting for the legal team and then not knowing where that's sitting, that is definitely a huge frustration across many organizations. I know I've experienced personally many times, but just the idea that, there's sort of this central place that the NDA requests are going. And the poor person sitting on the receiving end of that is obviously working as hard and as fast as possible, but it's just not knowing how long that's going to take, where you are in the queue, if yours is prioritized over others because it's a larger opportunity. So just lots of things that can happen in terms of delays and then not really knowing the status of those NDA requests and NDA process. Okay, Sorry to get personal on you so early, but why should we optimize the NDA process? So really, this is sort of this higher level kind of thought process, just in terms of some of the pains that I already mentioned. But thinking about optimizing this process, it's a pretty standard process within organizations. It's not a super high value process, right? But just thinking about using advances in technology to help maximize efficiency, reduce cost, free up some of your high value resources time to work on more important things. And then just again, thinking about this concept of organizations embracing digital transformation and embracing technology to automate these kind of manual, redundant, and low value tasks. There's also just the opportunity to speed things up so we can be, faster and more efficient with automation. Again, I've mentioned sort of focusing your teams on those larger, more strategic activities. And then really, as I mentioned, kind of the frustration that can happen with lack of automation is building better relationships with your internal customers and then potentially your partners and your prospects by kind of driving and optimizing this process a bit more. And then lastly, what kind of value are you going to get from sort of this digital first or an automated or kind of technologically enabled NDA process? Is just getting that visibility and status for all parties, right? Customer, prospect, salesperson, legal team, et cetera. And then also this concept of standardization. And I'll also mention sort of that thought process that is for these types of customers, it might be one type of an NDA. And then for others, it might be a different one. I'm not sure if that's true at all companies, but I have experienced that. If it needs to be prioritized based on the size of the customer or the size of the potential opportunity, so some automation and routing. And then automated signatures and approvals. So that's something that can really drive some speed within the process. And then just thinking about truly getting a return on investment. So this is a process that is happening within organizations on a fairly frequent basis. And we're about to ask you how often that happens in your organization. And just thinking about it's really, really has high potential for automation and increasing efficiency. Okay, so I think I'm going to do a poll. Hold on one second. I did not put a slide in here for this, but I'm just going to ask you guys a quick question because we're trying to get a sense of volume of NDAs within your organization. So if you could just quickly take this one question poll and answer it for us, just to get a sense of kind of where the volume is within your organization. And we really appreciate this insight. So it looks like across our audience, we have some with huge volume, some with sort of medium volume, and some with small volume. So that's super helpful. Excellent. Thanks so much, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and we appreciate your input. And so if my panelists can't see, we sort of have folks in the audience across the board. So a few folks have fewer than 10. So from a volume perspective, that's lower. And then everyone else tends to be greater than 10, and some are greater than 250. So we do have some folks with really high volume NDA processing happening within their organizations. Thanks, everybody. Okay, great. So now we're going to go ahead and transition into the next part of our webinar today. And I'm really excited because we love our special guests always, but we have two very special guests who are bringing great insight and kind of depth and breadth of knowledge from a legal perspective today. So that's exciting for us. And I'm actually going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves. So Amanda, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to introduce yourself first. And you folks can see that Amanda is a lawyer. She works as a legal analyst here at PipeFi, and she works specifically on NDAs as well as a lot of other contracts, intellectual property, et cetera. But Amanda, if you want to go ahead and give your background for us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kristin. Hi, everyone. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks for joining. I hope this conversation can really contribute with your NDA process. As Kristin kindly introduced, I'm a lawyer. I act with corporate law for the last couple of years, for the last almost 3 years. And indeed, NDAs, MSAs, process workflows are really relevant when you're dealing with a massive amount of contracts and massive amount of inputs from sales team and also from different customers. So I'm very happy to contribute with this chat with you. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Amanda. And we also have Sebastian Kaplan, who is joining us from outside of Pipefy and has a ton of law experience and legal experience. So Sebastian, go ahead and introduce yourself. And you are muted. I hope I didn't do that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sebastian Kaplan. I am of counsel at Myers Nave. I have been a litigator for almost my entire career, although I have done some consulting and transactional work from time to time, including reviewing NDAs and drafting them on behalf of clients. So I've seen the beginning of the process. I've seen the frustration with it. And in the trade secret litigation that I've done, I've seen the importance of the NDA and the risk of having inconsistent processes in place that can jeopardize your corporation's legal rights.
Great, thank you. So how this is going to work for our audience is I'll be asking a few questions, and then Amanda and Sebastian will be providing their insights from their experience and knowledge from their, kind of their years in the industry. And then if you want to chime in with any insights as well, feel free to put that in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. And if you have questions along the way, I will try to include those, but we do have time for Q&A at the end as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in here. I'm going to start, Sebastian, with you and ask, what are some of the challenges you are seeing generally with corporate legal processes today and in the industry?
Well, at the most abstract, the challenge is to minimize time, errors, and cost. And it's difficult to do all of that simultaneously. From my perspective as a litigator, I focused mostly on errors. I had a client who was being sued after they retained a number of employees from a competitor, and they were sued for misappropriation of trade secrets. When we received the exit checklists from the other company's HR department that were supposed to be the fence guarding the loss of trade secret and confidential information, they were missing, incomplete. For a lot of them, it looked like no one had even bothered. Of course, that was helpful for us, but it revealed that it is often quite difficult in the day-to-day course of business to check all of those boxes off, especially when there's multiple competing priorities. So getting that right, particularly when it comes to protecting confidential information, is extraordinarily important if you ever find yourself in a situation where you are attempting to either retrieve confidential information that someone has taken from your company, when you're dealing with a vendor who's trying to use your information for competitive advantage, or when you're being sued because someone has suspected that you've done the same. All of that is, the accuracy is incredibly important. At the same time, ensuring that accuracy usually comes with, excessive or burdensome costs and time. And so reducing that in order to improve accuracy and trying to take some of the, ordinary human error out of it really seems like something that will benefit corporate processes generally, and just, be what I think needs to be part of standard risk mitigation strategies for any legal department. I don't want to take up all the time. Kristin, do you want to switch it over to Amanda?
That's okay. I have a quick follow-up though. So would having a more integrated process, I don't think the legal team needs to be involved with employee offboarding, but is there anything from a risk mitigation perspective that could be part of the offboarding process that could help prevent that from happening?
Oh, I think there's lots of things. Legal should certainly be involved in designing those offboarding processes. When you're protecting confidential information, it's different than, say, patent or copyrighted information where ahead of time what that information is. For patents, you have to register it with the patent office. And so you have a limited universe of stuff that you're dealing with. With trade secrets, you usually don't really figure out what your trade secrets are, and often until information has been misappropriated and you have to figure out what the person got that is really valuable.
Right.
And so it gives you more of an amorphous, target to protect. And as a result, the process of protecting information generally becomes more important. So what I often advise my clients is to think about it as, having a fence or a wall around the company and its information. And you need to be checking the gates when people are coming in. They're not bringing anything that they shouldn't bring with them. When they're leaving, they're not leaving with anything that they shouldn't take with them. And so making sure that, legal is involved in the design of those systems. They don't actually have to be the gate guards, but they have to train them and teach them what to look for. That's very important. And also, why it's important. Many companies will go through, their entire existence, from inception to exit or a decade without any sort of, need to turn back to an NDA or any potential breach of confidential information. But, when it does happen, it can be the lifeblood of the company, right? That can be it. And so, it's one of those situations where you have to deal with, there's a great expression for this, oceans of boredom and islands of terror. So, most of the time it's just like, all right, this person's leaving. It's no big deal. Why do we have to go through all these steps? And just, making sure that people are aware of what those real risks are and how to prioritize it. Because, maybe the, low-level salesperson is, never had access to anything important, or maybe they surreptitiously downloaded, all of the leads from the company and, have it in a flash drive or put it on the cloud somewhere. So, all of these are things that you need to be aware of the risks, design your processes to minimize the likelihood that anything bad will happen, and to have a response plan in place if there is an event that you need to respond to. And the first thing is going to be pulling the NDA or the whatever agreement you have with the employee contract in the case of an employee. And if there's a missing signature there, that's going to be a real problem.
Got it. And I'll do a quick shameless plug because we do support digital transformation for other departments such as HR for onboarding and offboarding. So those are all processes that we can sort of bring this level of standardization and risk mitigation to as well. Okay, so I will jump over to Amanda. Amanda, anything you want to add to Sebastian's response to this one?
Well, I love the items Sebastian shared. I completely agree. I think everything is all about like the risk of non-compliance. And when we say that legal should be involved on the process of HR or even our internal process and other departments' processes, it's all about compliance. And if we are taking care of how people will see and will sign when they onboard or offboard our company, we are assured that even if a key employee, a C-level of your company will leave, you will be okay with the non-solicitation clause, with the confidentiality clause. So that's super important. And also a couple of companies I've been working on had already presented quite some harsh times by not having an NDA on the onboarding process of some key employees. So that's super pain point, and standardization is definitely needed.
Awesome, thanks. Well, I think you might have just answered the next question, but you want to add or elaborate on your response? So biggest challenge with NDA processes, and it doesn't have to be the employee NDA, but maybe also contract NDAs?
Yeah, I haven't. It was just one pain point. We have several. I think if you don't have really a standard process or workflow somehow to control your NDAs, it can get really messy. Mainly because you are dealing with internal clients of your own company, like sales team or partners or so on. And also you will be dealing with your external clients. So your opportunities of your company, your customers, and you have to communicate with their template sometimes. Other times you use your own. So like storing those NDAs is a pain point, as Sebastian mentioned previously. Like if it's a process that only the salesperson are in charge of, then they can just store it in the random Google Drive of your company, and that information can be lost. Or otherwise, you can have like one template of the customer that doesn't go through your legal's revision process, and then the legal representative that might not be the same person as the counsel that's reviewing the template can just sign something with a fine or something with a miscellaneous clause that's completely out of your own company standards. So I believe the main pain point I would bring here would be standardization and communication.
Got it. Okay, thanks. Sebastian, anything to add?
Well, so from my perspective, accuracy is always the most important, but that's just from my perspective. And I understand that, when you're talking about scale, when, we're talking to our attendees who are processing over 250 NDAs a year, the importance of efficiency, of reducing cost and time is probably as important, because if you can't, get those documents processed in time, your sales team is stuck and your business is going to flounder. So making sure that, you can do that efficiently and on time, I think is very important. And it impacts the ultimate risk as well. I had a client that realized that their very exciting new customer was actually their competitor, who was pretexting as potential customer in order to get their sales script. Now it turned out, because the sales team was so excited about this new customer, they had done the first few presentations before they had gotten an NDA. That puts at risk whatever information was disclosed in those instances. Now, we had really good facts on our side, and it worked out, but it was one of those situations where, it was really the lag in the process that potentially jeopardized our clients' confidential information. So if you can speed that up, then you have both a competitive advantage and a reduction in the risk that you're facing. My experience is that NDAs are too long, and either people just rubber stamp them, or they can quickly get bogged down in negotiating whatever their pet peeves are for the clauses, but that can take a lot of time. And so, for the purposes of this presentation, we're largely treating NDAs as a bit of a black box and not talking about the content of the agreements themselves. But I have to say that, it is challenging because there is not, well-established forms or norms around the NDAs. If you're a large enough company, you can essentially, require that your smaller vendors, smaller partners accept the terms of your NDA. I hope that you're updating them on a somewhat regular basis. And the legal landscape continues to change. So, for the past few years, residuals have been the big topic of, shifting NDAs, and, certain large tech companies now basically say that any confidential information you give them, whatever their personnel can remember, they're free to keep. That becomes a negotiation point, and quite an important one, depending on how sophisticated your confidential information is. If it's a long customer list, or if it's a very complex algorithm, there's less risk. But if it's, the 11 herbs and spices then that someone can actually remember, then you are risking quite a bit by letting someone walk away with whatever they can keep in their head. So, refining those, identifying mutually acceptable grounds where your partners don't feel like they're being strong-armed into accepting disadvantageous terms, but at the same time, you're able to protect your confidential information, and doing it fast is a really big challenge.
I would agree with that. And one more point, and this is not as sort of sophisticated as Sebastian and Amanda's, but, being easy to do business with, right? So imagine you are the front line as the account executive, and your prospect is ready to see your product, and you say, well, we have to put an NDA in place before we can give you a demo. And then that process takes 2 weeks and they're ready for the demo tomorrow. So what does that say about how operationally efficient you are as a company? And what is that going to translate into from a customer service process later down the line, right? So there's a potential perception or negative perception of inefficiency if this becomes a bottleneck process and takes a long time. And that's a challenge that, I have seen within my own organizations where I've worked and struggled with, because one organization, they prioritize NDAs for prospects where the deal size was over a certain number. And if your deal size was smaller than that, they literally asked for the opportunity size before they would process the NDA. It would basically take 3 times longer. So that perception of being more difficult to do business with is an initial impression that you're making on a prospective client or customer. And it matters, it does matter. So that was one of the challenges that I've experienced. And I thought that your insights were also just in terms of content. I wonder if there would be a way to potentially make the NDA content transparent and known to folks who are signing it, to the parties signing it, because everyone just signs it, and I don't think anybody really knows what's even in there. And so what are we agreeing to not disclose, right? So,
Right.
So anyway, lots of opportunities there for fixing some of the challenges. We'll keep moving. I think we can talk about this. We might have touched on this already, but Amanda, maybe I'll ask you this one first. Where do you think there are improvement opportunities in the NDA process? And you can talk about Pipefy specifically, or you can just talk generally, whatever you're more comfortable with.
All right. Okay. So maybe making a hook on what you've just mentioned, Kristin, I think better coordinating the process and the responsibilities on the NDA is super important, that the legal team and the sales team, or the internal, the person who's in charge to get the NDA signed by the customer and who eventually have the demo with the customer, knows what's the NDA content and what's an NDA all about. So I think that when you when the legal team is able to communicate to the sales team, the partner team, or whomever is responsible for that, when an NDA should be signed, and that is when confidential information is going to be shared, even when that's not yet a customer, but an opportunity where who's you want to sell to or to make a demo with. It shows that the company is considerate of that customer's or opportunity's personal data, in addition of being like very professional when the customer or the opportunity forgot to request that NDA, because mainly here at Pipefy, we are a process management platform. So we deal with crucial internal information of our customers, super delicate matters that can already be disclosed in a demo environment. So that shows that the salesperson, for instance, is very professional towards this customer. So I believe like the challenge I faced here at Pipefy was communicating to the other teams when should they sign an NDA and what was like the SLA for this NDA that I'm as a legal, as a lawyer here at Pipefy, I would assist them to get that demo as fast as we could, but it was important that they would sign an NDA with the customer before the demo, before the information was going to be shared. So was the same time on their align expectations of the sales team on faster response time, SLA for NDA, and on my end, making them understanding why it was so important for us to have an NDA with the customer.
Awesome. Thank you. Sebastian, anything to add?
Well, I think that Amanda raises some really good points. And one of the things that I'll just mention, although this is not legal advice because I don't know what confidential information any of you are actually dealing with, but over designation and even paranoia about confidential information is as much of an efficiency issue as failing to protect actual corporate trade secrets. If you require an NDA before your demo, really ask yourself why. Are you disclosing something that a competitor could use to get to market faster? Are you disclosing, information that can only really be used if they also possessed a bunch of the other information that you have? I've had clients who say, well, this shows all of our sales tactics, and they could reverse engineer things, and there's some truth to that, and there's some fear in that, and so which one of those it more closely matches reality really depends often on what industry you're in and how competitive, how many players there are, how content oriented your demos are, how substantive they are. So all of that, if you take the time to scrutinize that in advance, you can often streamline the NDA process by really identifying where the core information is that you really need to keep confidential lies, and making sure that you protect that, but that you're not frittering away time protecting everything because you're not really sure what matters.
Right.
So that kind of goes to the content of the NDA in terms of how you define what is confidential information. But in terms of the NDA processes, there should be standard NDAs that you have in place for vendors, for suppliers. Then it gets a little bit more complicated with partners. If you're trying to build some sort of business or product together, obviously there's going to be more information sharing. And then mergers and acquisitions, investors, there's different segments, and those people will have different levels of access to the information. So if you can demarcate those groups and have different NDAs ready to go for each of them, what I imagine for the people who have over 250 NDAs per year, a lot of those are for vendors or suppliers. And there you have a very specific idea, or hopefully do, of what it is that you're protecting. And those really should be automated. You're not going to be negotiating that. You may not be able to achieve the same efficiency gains when it comes to partners, but that's because you're doing something more complicated and you don't really want to automate it. You want to have something more bespoke and specific to that transaction.
Right.
So, I think identify those areas where it really is just about the churn, and then, reduce the amount of effort that goes into that.
Got it. Thank you. All right. I think we have 2 more questions, so let's keep going. I don't know if we've already answered this one or not, and this is actually the wrong question, so we'll keep going. In your experiences, have you seen process improvements put in place, and how have they impacted overall legal operations and I suppose the NDA process in general? And Amanda, you want to start with this one?
Yeah, sure. So I think this question just brings us back to the first question, or it was related to what challenges we see the most regarding NDA process. And I think having a centralized mechanism, even if that's probably a tool, right? Like a software here at Pipefy, we use our own system to manage NDA process and NDA workflows. But if you have, I don't know, another way to centralize this, that would be excellent, because our main challenges were regarding, I believe, that the compliance of having these documents stored and centralized and being able to communicate with your internal clients and your external clients, your customers, and both your sales team. What are the next steps and what are the SLAs for these documents to be signed and to be complete and to be stored, and to have a clear communication, a clear expectation on what are the next steps. Those were some points that I've noticed I could accomplish by using a centralized and unified system to store, manage, and communicate throughout my NDA process. So we are able, like, to get the right approvals. If, for instance, I have my own template of NDA here at Pipefy, where I use one for our employees and another one for our customer and one for our vendors. When sometimes, like Pipefy is a great company, amazing company, but we do have some customers that are like unicorns, they are huge, and they say, hey, I will not take the time to review your template. You are going to take the time to review my template. So we're like, yeah, okay. And even if that's the case, it's important for us to have aligned expectations on SLA with the team, right? And also to know what are the standard points and clauses of an NDA, as Sebastian brought. That's important. And what we accept and what we don't accept, so you can review it faster. Like you can just check it, the content, and then you go term. Oh, okay, I accept 5-year term, 2-year, 3 years term, but I will not accept an NDA for life. Or miscellaneous, as I've mentioned previously. I will accept like United States, if you want Delaware, California, or New York, that's okay. But if you want New Delhi, well, I cannot go with that. So I think when you have one way to centralize all comments that and all revisions that you're making through this same NDA, that can be really, really good for your process, for your team and PS, for instance, and also for the salesperson or the other person who is responsible to address the NDA signature process with the customer, with the external customer, to be able to know what's happening, what are the next steps, and how to access our team and discuss even whether it's concerns, or if it, as Kristin has mentioned, sometimes I have a demo for tomorrow and the customer is saying, hey, I won't go talk to you if I don't have the NDA in place. So it's great when you have one place to communicate with everyone and you can already store what was made, what changes were allowed with the third party template, for instance.
Awesome. Sebastian, anything to add?
Oh, so many things, but I see we're coming up on 5 minutes to the end and I want to give people time to ask questions.
Okay, let's see. I guess anything before we go to Q&A that you guys want to share, or maybe we get your additional comments during the Q&A. I don't actually know. I'm having a little bit of a hard time with my Zoom today, like in getting the top thingy to come down. So give me 1 second. There it goes. I don't see any questions yet, but one of the questions I do have for both of you is just, I guess, have you seen other processes within legal departments that are challenged with similar challenges that the NDA process has in terms of volume, inefficiency, manual activities, maybe in your point, Sebastian, just like having standardized templates so that it's a little bit more efficient. But I guess I wonder, are there any other processes that you would consider that fall in the same optimization category as NDAs within a legal operations or legal department?
Well, I think there's, employee agreements. There's, any sort of vendor supplier agreements. Really you can, just kind of look at the volume of what's the highest volume of deals that are being done. And one of the features that affects the efficiency of all of them is really what position that you're starting from. So, the incentive of the sales team is just to move the deal forward. The incentive of legal is usually to, minimize risk and protect the information as much as possible. And so if what you have is the sales team trying to aggressively push the deal forward and the legal team presenting a very aggressive or one-sided NDA, that can often alienate potential partners and customers. And so, a lot of my clients and colleagues, I've found out often have not had frank conversations about how to balance that. And, if the point of the NDA is really to provide protection while moving the deal forward, then, you want to start with a much more balanced agreement, more equitable terms, and then signal that this is not something that you want to spend much time negotiating. Most people, at least in my experience, have been amenable to that. Of course, it depends on the person on the other side and the terms. I mean, that's what's so interesting about all of this, right? Is that there's not a science to it. It's really about the people behind it. So if you have very aggressive legal department or a very conservative one, the negotiations are going to take a different form. And making sure that those incentives are aligned between the business and legal really sets up the efficiency of the process going forward. And then once those are aligned, you can have the sort of automation that Pipefy offers. Or I read the checklist manifesto by Atul Gawande a few years ago, and that's informed my practice of making sure that we dot all the I's and cross all the T's. But you have to have that alignment initially, or you're going to really deal with a lot of friction down the road.
Absolutely. All right, great. Well, I appreciate that. We did have one question that I'm going to actually answer in the next portion, which is sort of, what are some of the signals that indicate need for NDA process automation? Or is it just volume, or is it other things? So I think it's, if I'll just kind of sum up what we've talked about, it's sort of risk mitigation, standardization, the need for these things, just kind of speed and efficiency for your go-to-business teams. And then just that sort of concept of having multiple but standard versions of NDAs across the different need for the NDAs within the organization. So I think that's relevant. And then the last question is, I'm going to cover it too as well, but just this concept of what other legal processes or documents can be managed within Pipefy, which I'm actually going to talk about in just a second. So just really quick, as we wrap up here, I'm just going to give a quick blurb just to give you guys a sense of who Pipefy is and kind of what we do. So this highlighted or bolded statement of a no-code process orchestration platform has a lot of industry verbiage in it. But what that really means is it's an interface that's designed for business teams and business users to actually define and automate their own processes within a very simple user interface, so that you can actually build out your own NDA process to automatically route approvals, interact with your sales teams, manage the document. So from a document signage perspective, we could integrate with a DocuSign or Adobe Sign, or any of those signature types of applications. So there's an integration opportunity there for automated signature. And this includes obviously NDA processes we've talked about today, but also contract management, onboarding, and employee agreements, and more. So supplier agreements, vendor agreements, et cetera. So anything you can think about from sort of a document process automation would be relevant to manage and automate within Pipefy. And the real kind of goal here is to support business users to be able to manage and automate their own processes. So with that, we are at the end of our time. I want to thank all of our attendees. Thank you so much for attending today. But I particularly want to thank our panelists. So Amanda and Sebastian, thank you so much for all of that insightful industry-specific information and knowledge and experience. And for those of you attending, as we mentioned, we will be sending out the slides and the recording. So feel free to share with your colleagues. And if you have any questions, go ahead, Sebastian.
Interrupt. There's a last question. Is there a place I can go to see this process live? I can't answer that question, but I would suggest you might have to sign an NDA first.
Actually, you do not, but we do have this process live in our demo day next week. So this is the registration QR code for that, or you can just go to the pipefy.com demo day registration page. And you can also just reach out to sales@pipefy.com. So we appreciate everyone attending. Thanks again, Sebastian and Amanda. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.